to make the dress version, you want to start with a completed upper tank part of the dress. So you're going to make the entire tank just as written, but you don't want to put the straps on until you have everything else below the tank also attached, because the skirt's going to add weight and pull the tank down, so you may want to change the amount of length in your straps accordingly. So you want to complete the upper portion of the tank just as written. Now, I have shortened mine where I want it to cut off. That is entirely up to you, like where you want that to be cut off on your body. So you can make the whole tank and then just chop off what you don't want to have, or you can measure down and make a guess as to how long you want it to be. So it's really up to you how long you want the upper part of the dress to be. Also of note, I am including an inner shelf bra on the inside of this tank, which there's a separate tutorial just to show how to do that part in case you are only interested in that part. But if you do want to put a shelf bra in this, look for that other video. So you've got the upper portion totally ready to go, just without the straps. Then you're going to cut 2 skirt pieces. Again, really up to you what you want these to look like. I'm using my emery dress pattern because I want it to be more of an A-line versus just a rectangle shape. But you can really have it be whatever you want, whatever skirt shape you like. You can include pockets if you want. This one I'm not going to include any pockets in it. I just want a simple skirt on it. So once you've figured out what skirt pieces you like and you cut those cut out, we're going to sew those 2 skirt pieces right sides together along your side seams. So I have my skirt front and back here sewn on the side seams, and this is my top edge that's going to be along the waist. And I want to treat this just like any other skirt that you're going to gather to attach to a bodice. So I'm going to run 2 rows of baste stitches from side seam to the other side seam, just above and just below my seam allowance. Now, since this is just a hack from a pattern, there is no set seam allowance, but I'm going to sew this at the 3/8 just like the rest of the tank project. So if my seam allowance is 3/8, then I want my baste stitches to be at 1/4 and half. So I'm just above and just below. So again, 2 rows of baste stitches from side seam to side seam, and then we'll come back here and attach this to the tank top. So here are my 2 rows of baste stitches from side seam to side seam. I like to break at the side seam so that I can gather each front and back section separately. So we want to put the tank and the skirts together at the bottom of the tank and the top of the skirt. So we're going to turn the skirt wrong side out so that it is the bigger item wrong side out and the smaller item right side out, so we can put the small item inside the bigger item. We're going to flip this so the top of the tank is going inside the skirt, and you're going to want to anchor at center front and center back as well as the side seams. So if you haven't cut a notch at the centers, you're going to want to do that. Find your center points and mark those. I just sort of habitually always mark my centers. So there's a center here, and I'm going to find the center on the other side of the tank and the skirt. Match those up. Again, this is right sides together, and I'm keeping my pins on the gathered side since that's the side I'm going to want to sew on. And then I'm going to do the same at the side seams. That internal shelf bra is just floating down in there. You can just keep that out of the way during this process. I'm going to separate my baste threads so that I have the 2 on the inside on each side sort of tucked down in, and the ones on the outside easily grabbable. And again, I'm going to line up those seams and pin, and do the same on the other side. Alright, so we've got this divided into 4 equal sections. Here's our 2 fronts, and here's our 2 sides. And now we're going to just gather up this section of the skirt from the side seam to the center point. So I'm going to pull on these based threads and gather that up until the 2 distances match each other. Not worried right now about evening out the gathers or anything. Once they're the same distance, I'm going to wrap the threads on that pin at the side seam like a figure 8 to just hold it in place so that the gathering won't continue to shift. And I'm going to do the second section on that same side of the skirt. So this section is gathered, but obviously not evenly spread out. So I'm going to now spread out those gathers so that they're nice and even across that quarter of the skirt. And then pin the 2 layers together. You want to make sure that you're keeping those raw edges lined up as you go to pin these 2 together. So there's the first quarter section. Here's a side seam, here's a center, and it's all gathered up and pinned. And I'm going to continue to do that with the remaining 3/4 of the skirt until it's all pinned and gathered like that. So now that we have the skirt totally gathered up and pinned to the tank top bottom, we are now just going to sew these 2 together. However, you do want to think about the fact that this needs to be a stretch stitch. So if you want to sew this with a conventional sewing machine, you're going to be sewing it at the seam allowance you've decided on. For me, it's going to be 3/8. And you can use like a double overlock on your regular conventional machine, or a stretch straight stitch, something that's going to allow this to stretch when it's being worn on your body. If you want to use a serger, the one catch about using a serger is that if you're going to sew at 3/8, it's going to cut off this upper based stitch at the same time, and it might get your gathers sort of out of place. So what I prefer to do in that instance is do another based stitch at your seam allowance and then go over it with your serger, so that it's not, you're locking the gathers in place with that additional based stitch, so that when you go over it with your serger, you're just sort of, you know, going over it to make sure it stretches, essentially. So you just don't, I've never had really good luck going at this and cutting off that upper baste while using my serger. I find my gathers get kind of wonky looking. Maybe you have better luck than me, but that's never really worked for me. So depending on what you're choosing, you just want to make sure you're choosing a stretch stitch here. So I'm going to take that over to my machine and do a baste, and then my serger across the top, and then come back here. Alright, so again, the waist is all finished, and now I've added the straps on the top, and I have hemmed the bottom of the skirt. So that is it for how to make the tank into a dress. It's really super easy. Just slice it off at the length you want, add the shape of the skirt on at the bottom that you want. Pockets optional, of course. The key, of course, is to make sure that that waist stitch still stretches, because this is a knit after all. And again, if you want to go to the other video to see how I'm going to now add the shelf bra on the inside of this, there's a separate video just for that. I hope you've enjoyed this.